Bhagavate Ramakrishna. Om. Salutations to Bhagavan Ramakrishna. We're going to speak about the centrality of sacrifice. And it's obvious, religious sacrifices. Religion, some theologians speak of humanity as hominis religiosus, that is, people who are by nature religious. And this has been with us for not a few thousand years, put it back. And as long as we were there on this earth as a species, we have had some form of religion. And this religion is what bonded us, sustained us, civilized us. It was the very basis of every social and every other, you can say, activity of human life. Human life centered around this instinct or this innate, you can say, feeling, the very fiber of our being. That's religion. So this innate feeling of religion, I'm not talking about organized religions. In fact, organized religions have done more harm to this religious instinct than any other, can say, detrimental factors. And we know the price that humanity has paid with its wars and fanaticism. I was talking about a pure religious instinct that was there, that is there in humans. It has also, apart from civilizing and bonding us and keeping us engaged with our multifarious activities, it has also given us a transcendent view of life. I'm not talking about a heaven. That's not a transcendent view of life. That's a kind of a stupid view of life. A transcendent view of life is something that takes you away from the mundane, gives you a kind of a feeling of eternality. Otherwise, the mundane activities would have simply just killed us. Now, within this mighty religious instinct, there is another stream, and which is the topic of today: sacrifices. From the very beginning, sacrifices have played an integral role in all religions, in all societies. And from the very beginning, humans have understood no sacrifice goes in vain. And life has to be based on sacrifice. We have seen the religions everywhere on this earth having some form of sacrifice. So there are these scholars who say that religion grew out of the primeval, you can say, sacrifice. And it is true. You can see that daily life is based on sacrifice, and the sacrifice manifests as love. If you want to love, you've got to sacrifice, and you have to sacrifice, you've got to love. It's a hallmark, sacrifices. And we know the person who does not learn to sacrifice lives an extremely miserable life. So, this idea of sacrifice, in some form or the other, through rituals and mythology and philosophy, pervades the religious literature as well as all of the other life activities. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita says, I will quote, "At the beginning of creation, having created the beings together with the sacrifices, the Lord said, by this you multiply. Let this be your yield of coveted objects of desires. Sahayagnya prajasashtva purovacha prajapati." So, God created human beings and all life and the universe, of course, with sacrifices, together with sacrifices. And later on we find in one of the sublimest hymns in the Vedas that creation has sprung out from a sacrifice. It's called a Purusha Suktam. Swamiji encapsulates it beautifully. It's a sacrifice of the lower self for the higher self. And you can see how, take for instance, the mother's love for the child. The mother can give up her life for the child. And this mother instinct is not only in humans. I am sorry to say, we think we are a little kind of unique. You find this mother instinct in all of creation. Every mother will sacrifice her life for the offspring. We have seen it in animals, and birds, and plants, everywhere. It's all there. So, this idea of sacrifice is not only a kind of a religious idea, it is, as I say, the warp and the woof, or kind of contained within creation. As the Lord has said, that creation has come out of sacrifice. So, there are various types of sacrifices, various. I mean, even in the Bhagavad Gita, you find a staggering variety of sacrifices enumerated there by the Lord. But these ideas came much later. The first idea was, there was the idea of a daily sacrifice. One had to sacrifice daily. And in those days, you had these fire sacrifices. And later on, these sacrifices were internalized by the sages, which then became the Upanishads. The Upanishads are nothing but the idea internalized. Apart from the various sacrifices enumerated here, so we find one thing, that by the time the epic age, Vedic age was kind of replete with sacrifices. By the time the epic age, the age of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, ideas of sacrifices were crystallized in a way that it could be performed by everyone without exception. And the first mention of these sacrifices is found in the Mahabharata. Till today, these sacrifices have remained largely unchanged because of its comprehensiveness. So, the Bhagavad Gita also says that, know that karma has its Vedas as its origin. The Vedas has the immutable as its source. Hence, the all-pervading Veda is forever based on sacrifice. Karma brahmodbhavam vidhi brahmakshara samudbhavam. So, even the Vedas are based on that sacrifice. Yeah, if you have scriptures and it's not put into practice, the scriptures are useless. The scriptures are supposed to impel us into action, to do something. So, even during the later codified age, that is the, you can say, Sutra age, Manu says it is incumbent for everyone to perform sacrifices, no matter who they are, what they are. In Vedanta, we have the theory beautifully laid down. It's so beautiful. I mean, it's so philosophically rigorous. Nobody can find a chink in its structure. And people have been accustomed to thinking that we have the philosophy and that's all. So they close their eyes, they think they are meditating, they think Vedanta makes them feel special. Everyone else are not special at all. The world is unreal, but their own self. But when you ask them, have you done the rituals of the Vedanta? Saying what? Vedanta has simply dismissed all rituals. No, they haven't. We'll enumerate 5 of them, which makes one ready to be a Vedantist in the truest sense. So, we have the 5 as sacrifices offered to the sages, the rishis, sacrifices offered to the gods, sacrifices offered to your ancestors, sacrifices offered to society, the people around, and sacrifice offered to the environment. These are the 5 sacrifices. And as I said, these are comprehensive. We will go through the enumeration one by one. Vivekananda also says sacrifice has been in the past the law. It will be so for alas, for ages to come. We also have, the Gita also says that Shankaracharya in his commentary says that we owe a debt to the sages, the manis and the gods because they sustain us. So, here we have the idea that why do you do all these sacrifices? Because you owe a debt to the world around, the seen and the unseen realms. You may think that you are alone or your family is alone or something like that. You are not alone. So, we have a debt to pay, and this is what constitutes life. So, when you know that you have received many things from many places, it's nothing, there is no free lunch, as they say. So, you got to repay your debts. And how do you repay your debts? Through these sacrifices. So, the very first sacrifice is the sacrifice to the sages. It's called a Brahma Yajna or Rishi Yajna. And a Yajna is a sacrifice. In the old days, and even today, of course, it was the ancient fire sacrifices, which were later again internalized. So, it made life in whatever we did, said, or even thought as a component of sacrifice. Everything could be transformed into sacrifice once the whole idea was internalized. So, the first is we owe a debt to the sages. Now, sages is called the rishis. They were put first in place of even the gods. And for the simple reason is, one thing, we have all been descended from those sages. So, how do you honor them? How do you repay the debt? By studying the scriptures, by chanting, by meditating, you do what they did. They left us behind a huge spiritual legacy, and we have got to continue that legacy. Swami Vivekananda says, what is the mission of every Hindu? I mean, it's a mission of everybody when you are speaking about it, is to protect the treasury of religion. That is what you're supposed to do. Protect the treasury of religion. And we find from the lowest to the highest such grand and sublime spiritual truths have been given to us. These are not speculations or just plain philosophy. These are experiences. Those sages experienced, and then they articulated it into scriptures. And we have a staggering variety of scriptures. It's not even one lifetime is not sufficient. 10 lifetimes probably are not sufficient to read even one section of the scriptures that are available. So it is the spirituality that actually sustains us, and we owe a debt to them, because for thousands and thousands of years, people have cultivated this knowledge, protected this knowledge, and handed it over down to the next generation. Imagine this going on for 5,000 or 6,000 years. Half of the society was actively engaged in culturing, protecting, and transmitting this knowledge that they have received to the next generation of students and children. Sometimes when I kind of try to wonder, my brain kind of reels. So that's why they are the worshipful ones, and we owe a debt, and we have to sacrifice by doing this. And how do you do that? Yeah. So in one of the valedictory, you can say, addresses to the students, there's a beautiful, you can say, passage in one of the Upanishads called the Taittiriya Upanishad, where the Guru says, Swadhyayan ma pramadam, do not make any mistake while studying. Speak the truth, satyam vada, follow religion, dharmam chara. These are the instructions given to the student after the student has finished his studies. He and she, they're both leaving, and the Guru is telling, the Acharya is telling them this. So he's saying, make no mistake about studies. And this is how the whole of society sustained itself. Studies, 12 years, 24 years, diligently studying the Vedas and discussing it. And there's a huge, huge literature now, which has come because of this. So the first debt is the sages. It's called a Brahma Yajna or Rishi Yajna. We are repaying the debts through these sacrifices. The second one is the sacrifice to all the gods and goddesses, the teeming number of gods and goddesses. Gods are nothing but the shining ones. They are behind every function in the universe. Not only in the universe, as some of our earlier talks were mentioned, they are also embedded within us. So these gods run the universe, as it were, the shining ones. This is the spiritual principle behind every phenomena. We may think that the world is material. That's your worldview, because your worldview is gross. There are those who had very finer perceptions, and they saw that the universe is spiritual in nature. And in this spiritual nature of the world, this has aspects of it which are run by different deities. And there are teeming number of them. Millions and millions of them are the gods. So there are gods within, there are gods without. outside. So what we do is to worship them. Now, in the old days, there was either a family or a village or a clan deity. Today, we can worship that supreme Godhead itself as the recipient of sacrifices. Because if the God is pleased, tasmin tushte jagat tushte. So if the God is pleased, everyone is pleased. So we worship. How is that? That this is formal worship, and this was again incumbent on every person. One had to start the day or end the day with a sacrifice. You couldn't get out of this, because we are sustained by these gods. So we need to repay. And in the Bhagavad Gita also is said, Devan bhavayatanena te deva. You nourish the gods and the gods nourished you. Nourishing one each other, you will attain the supreme goal. It's a beautiful concept. And again it says, Yo bhunkte stena evacha. And though if what you partake is not offered beforehand to God, you are a thief. Yes, some of the words in the scriptures are a little caustic, but true, because you have been given things by the gods and you are not offering it to them as a kind of a worship. So you are a thief, that's what I say. However, let's proceed. So this worship of the gods was also central to life. It's acknowledging your own spiritual nature as related to the gods. You first related to your ancestors in the sense of your sages, and then you're connected with the gods, with the spiritual realm. The third debt that you owe, that every one of us owes, is the debt to our ancestors. Now, you'll say, okay, apart from the genetics and epigenetics that we have inherited, we have been able to be born in a heritage or an ambience where we could cultivate further. Whatever you have received has been received because of their grace. They have worked so hard and they have given you things that you are not even aware of. In the old days, ancestor worship was part of religion. And in Vedanta, Hinduism, we retained that but modified the whole thing. Before any ritual, we had to, you can say, remember 14 generations, the names of 14 generations that preceded us. We don't even remember maybe 3, maybe 2, 3, but we don't remember anything else. But it was necessary for us before any rituals to remember all of them. So here, how do you worship them? By praying, of course. And also a small morsel of food was left outside your plate. Before you even began eating, you had to leave a small morsel, and that was taken and immersed in a body of water or a tank or something like that. That was the worship of the ancestors. So it was integral within religion. And so what happens is the family connections were kind of maintained. The ancient family connections were maintained. The fourth sacrifice is the sacrifice of social commitment. We are living in society. We think that we are, because this society pays so much emphasis on the individual. The individual cannot exist without everyone else. So it was feeding the sick, looking after the poor. And in India, there was, like, for example, Shri Ramakrishna's mother, she would never eat without seeing everyone else has eaten or no. Not only in her house, but in the village, she used to go around and ask people if they are still yet unfed, and she would give part of, or sometimes the entirety of a food to them. That was the idea of a sacrifice. You go out and look after those who are in need, those who are sick, those who are sad, those who are poor. You go out and help them. That is sacrifice. If you don't, then you are not, as I say, networked with society. Human life is connected in very, very intricate ways. So if you sustain that life, you are sustaining yourself. You have a debt to repay to humanity, not only to your society, to humanity. Go out in the world, and if it is burning, douse the flame. That is your duty, and that is your debt, that is your sacrifice. So each one of us, if you would have performed the sacrifice correctly, we wouldn't have had so many problems. We lock ourselves in our rooms and say, I'm fine, I'm all right, while the world outside is burning. So this is making religion into a positive force. And the fifth sacrifice is sacrifice for all the living beings other than humans. Or you go and plant a garden, water some trees, and sustain all life. Don't be destructive. It is a commitment to the environment, to all other life that is out there. And if we can have that, we'll have a better environment. Instead of only cleaning our house and rooms and throwing all the dirt outside, killing. So yesterday we were at a retreat, and somebody was saying, giving me a plastic spoon, and I said, yeah, I'm not going to use that because it's going to kill something else after a while. So he was kind of looking, oh, what's yeah. So to be responsible for all life, that was part of your duty, your debt to be repaid. That is a sacrifice. You do start with the small things. Don't harm any life. And in the old days, again, before you could even eat, you placed a morsel of food outside your plate on a kind of a piece of, you can say, or leaf or something like that, and that was taken and given for the birds, or there's any plants or animals or anything like that. You had to sustain your environment. So these 5 angles of the sacrifices for the sages, the rishis, sacrifices to the gods, sacrifices to the ancestors, sacrifices to society, to humanity, and sacrifices for all the living beings in the world. What happens? This is Vedanta. Many people think, oh, what's Vedanta? This is Vedanta. If you don't get connected with the seen and the unseen, the past and the present, the living and the dead, you are connected now with everything. This is the worship of the palpable living God. Swamiji was over and over emphasizing. So he is saying, Daridra Devo Bhava, Murka Devo Bhava. That is, let the ignorant be your God, let the poor be your God. He said, we have enough of worship. Now worship the palpable living God. How do we do that? This is the way. This is Vedanta in practice. We thought, oh, we'll read some Vedanta books, we'll listen to some Vedanta lectures, and we are Vedantins. Sorry. It takes a hero to be a Vedantist. You got to go out and start sacrificing yourself, your comforts, your joys, everything for the others. It's only then that we can. So you are connected with all the people, weak and strong and high and low. Everybody are equal recipients of your, you can say, your sacrifice. So instead of becoming, this is a kind of, instead of becoming a kind of a egocentric person, you become cosmocentric person. And this is the centrality of sacrifice, when you are now connected with the entire, as they say in Vedanta, Saguna Brahman, the Brahman that is manifest. If you can't sacrifice, or you cannot worship this Saguna Brahman, the manifest Brahman, you will never be able to understand the absolute Brahman. So it starts here. This is how we start. And people talk about feeling lonely, alone, this, that. They say, what is life? What is the meaning of life? And sometimes I used to wonder questions, such questions, like what is life? What is the meaning of life? Oh my God, if they would have done something like this, then these questions would not have arisen at all. What is this kind of blabbering? This is like kindergarten children. What is life? What is the meaning of life? This is life and this is the meaning of life. Sacrifice. Sacrifice yourself for others in all these areas, and you will start growing, and not physically, of course, but your consciousness will start expanding. If this is not Vedanta, then there's no other Vedanta. If people say, when I close my eyes, I cannot meditate. I tell them, you don't have to do that. If you can do this, that's fine. Go out and become a great karma yogi. You owe a debt to all these factors, and you got to repay it. Let's put it like that. That's better. And how do you do it? Through love. So these, you're getting connected with all the sages, all the gods and goddesses, all your ancestors. Yeah, with all your ancestors, because you're carrying all their genetic material also along with it. You've got a whole history of the human race written in your genes. It's not something, oh, I don't care for that. Yeah, the whole of humanity has left its records here within you, and you're carrying all that. You're carrying that great, you can say, human heritage, all those struggles that our ancestors have gone through for millions of years. They're all there within you. So it's acknowledging all that, the past and the gods and the sages and the environment and all other living beings. This is the centrality of sacrifice. Okay. So there are various influences on us, as we know. Every human life is subject to various factors, like from your body temperature to the viruses and bacteria. You can see how viruses have affected all of us. We're calling it pandemic. So these factors are here. There are also these unseen factors that influence us. So our life is not in a kind of a vacuum. It's not a bubble. It is a stream of life. The more you give, the more you will receive. The more you receive, the more you will give. Keep on giving. Never hoard. You stagnate, you die. So give your time for others, give your life for others, give everything for others. So Yudhishthira in a dialogue, he said, even if the person is poor, does not have food, a kind word, offer a seat, a smile also is a form of service. So there it is. So he also says that if a person has everything in life, and yet if that person does not sacrifice to all these 5 factors, that person is dead. Swami Vivekananda also says, they only live who live for others, the rest are more dead than alive. Here it is. So this is, so what is life? Oh, you're already dead. What do you mean? So life, yeah, life means that it reaches out to the entire seen and unseen world. You're getting connected with everything, especially the spiritual world. And then, okay, now this sacrifice, now it was in the old days yajna. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, one thing we have understood is no sacrifice is in vain. Okay, we know if you sacrifice, you are rewarded for that sacrifice, and this has been the basic human instinct. Otherwise, we will never work for others, never. Humanity, with all its selfishness, also has understood this, that altruism, that working for somebody else does pay in the end. Now, who is that entity that looks after what you have been doing, what you have been sacrificing? And it's the Lord himself. He says in the Bhagavad Gita, I am indeed the enjoyer as also the Lord of sacrifices, but they do not know me in reality. And that's why they fall. So, aham hi sarva yajnanam bhokta cha prabhureva cha. I am the Lord of all the sacrifices. God himself says, I am the Lord of all sacrifices, but they do not know me. And again, in another place to Arjuna's question, he said, I am the primeval entity, the being, and I am called the first sacrifice, Adi Yajna. And where is that Lord of the sacrifice? I think he must be in some kind of some heaven or something. No, that's not Vedanta. If you are looking for something in heaven and all, that's not Vedanta. That's just a kind of immature side of religion. So he's saying, Adi Yajno aham evatra deha deha britambara. I am the primeval Lord of the sacrifices who resides here in every body. I reside in all the bodies. So I am the observer, the enjoyer, the Lord of the sacrifices, and I offer the rewards likewise. So the Lord of the sacrifices is here. The centrality of your sacrifices is the Lord. And there we have to pour all our oblations. If you do it externally, it goes to him, her. If you do it mentally, it goes to, in whatever you speak and whatever you can say, think, whatever you do, offer it as a sacrifice. And that's how the Lord says, Yat karoshi yadashnasi. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you think, do it as an offering to me. So when you offer everything to the Lord will reward you with what? With an extensive consciousness. What do you want more? You will become connected with the Lord of the sacrifices who pervades everything. So the centrality of sacrifices is the Lord who dwells in all bodies, who is the beginning and the end. The entire cosmic process began with the sacrifices. is sustained by the sacrifices will end in sacrifices. And so has to be all life. It has to follow this. The very beginning of all your life, physical, mental, spiritual, begins with a sacrifice, your mother, and then is sustained through that sacrifices. And as you keep on growing, you also keep on sacrificing yourself, and it ends in the sacrifice. So this is the centrality of life, sacrifice. Om, peace, peace, peace. Oh, yeah, save the environment. Don't go on killing things. I'm not killing anything, but you're leaving a huge carbon footprint, and that everything you do is leaving a carbon footprint. Start reducing it. Use recyclable materials. Like for instance, here, go and plant a tree, or plant, help people, or do something.
So the green energy and all has come new, but previously what they were doing, like hundreds of years before.
We were very conscious about all these things. Only now we, unfortunately, we thought that this external world was supposed to be exploited for our sakes. Take for instance Native Americans. See how they lived sustainably. Even if they had to kill some animal for food, they used to pray for that spirit of that animal, to the plants. For them, the mountain was a sacred mountain. The rivers were a sacred mountain. The trees were sacred. Don't you see that? This is the remnant of all humanity till we came down to this age of enlightenment or something like that. They call it the age of enlightenment. I call it the age of darkness. God made all these things for your good. Enjoy it. No. So they lived sustainably. You go to any of the, you can say, forest tribes, you see how even when they cut trees for firewood, see how they cut. They will see that the tree survives. And what do we do? So live sustainably and do as less damage as possible to the environment. So I use the example of the plastic bag. You throw a plastic bag, you throw it out. It's like the law of karma, and it comes back to you as microplastics because everything comes back to you. That's the law of karma. So, so you have to be conscious of what you are doing, because and try to teach others also this. As I've said, and repeating again, we are in the 6th mass extinction. If everything gets extinct, we also get extinct. There's no way of you going to Mars or anywhere else. So it's an organic whole. You see, these people spoke in these terms of helping the environment, protecting or sacrificing the environment. They knew that they say, like, I have my lungs here, but the half of those lungs are in those trees out there. Yeah. So there it is. I'm only worried about, I've got COPD, but I'm going to cutting and killing those trees. So there it is. This idea of sacrifices is going to make you much more receptive to people and things. Okay. And in these days of environmental consciousness, and what does your religion have to say about this? Yeah, you worship it. And that is what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to desecrate it. You're not supposed to destroy it. See how destructive we are. And as a result, we also suffer because of that destruction. What's the difference between yajna and tapas? How would you translate tapas? Could you elaborate on tapas? Ha! The Bhagavad Gita says, Yajna dana tapa karma na tyajam karyameva tat. Yajna dana tapa karma pavanani manishina. I'll translate it, don't worry. It might become cumbersome for you. Yajna, sacrifice, dana, charity, and tapas. That is the concentration of your mind and the senses. Okay, that is the highest form of tapas. Tapas is literally to heat up your spiritual nature, your higher nature. So the Lord says this yajna and charity and tapas, austerity or penances, should not be given up under any circumstances, because yajna and charity and penances are the purifiers of the wise. Okay. What's the difference? Now, if you club both, like I club, where there is sacrifice, there is love. If there is no love, there is no sacrifice. Okay. So, when you are doing a kind of particular sacrifice, suppose you are feeding a hungry person, this is one form of a penance also. It may be a form of a sacrifice, but it is also a form of penance. So, that yajna, that sacrifice itself, can become a form of austerity or penance, okay, because it awakens your higher nature and it concentrates your mind and your senses. So, though these things, these two aspects of life, sacrifices and penances, are separate, yet in the final analysis they can be said to be one. You do one properly, you will get the result of the next also. Swamiji, as you know, the violence here in Mexico has no limits. How can we increase our spiritual strength in this situation? Wow. So, this is an unfortunate aspect of society. Modern societies are based on violence and killing. If it's not done physical, it's mental. If it's not mental, it's moral. And we have the entire judiciary and the laws and the police and the jail systems all trying to contain the violence. Imagine how violent human beings are, because we are selfish. We don't see anything beyond a few feet of us. My space, my this, my that. Yes, it's unfortunate. Like this, there's ongoing war in Ukraine. How much untold sufferings, not only Ukraine, in Yemen and Sudan and all these places. Why this kind of pugnacity, this kind of violence in human beings have driven us almost to extinction? Yeah, it has smashed societies. So, what would you do? How to attain spiritual strength? Yes, I would advise you slowly to perform these kind of sacrifices, build spiritual strength. It is extremely important, because you must be able to look at these aberrations in human minds and societies and be able to solve your own problems, your own confusion, your own doubts. That is there a realm of spirituality or no? You must become spiritual, and as you become spiritual, the others around you also will become spiritual. It's a kind of a chain reaction. It might be a long, slow process, but right now you've got to commit some time of your day or some part of your life to your own spiritual growth. People want the economic growth, people want social growth, people want this growth, that growth, and they sweat blood for that. They kind of destroy their life in getting some material benefits, which ultimately is taken away from them. But if they would have spent a little time in for their spiritual welfare and growth, this world would have been a better place. Okay. So build up your spiritual strength by praying to whichever God you would like. If you want to pray to Shri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Swamiji, pray. Ask them for light and they will respond. This is one thing that I have been trying to tell people. Does God respond to prayer? Shri Ramakrishna himself said, God listens to sincere prayers. No prayer is ever in vain. So if you would pray for others, those prayers are answered even more quickly. If you pray for yourself, God says, okay, later on. If you pray for others, they are answered quickly. So pray.